Hi, my name is Renata. Welcome to my YouTube channel, which is dedicated to intercultural communication and expat life, public speaking, business skills, and job search across cultures, and foreign language learning. So this video today is about the third category, foreign language learning. I work with a lot of language learners, and I often get the question, how long does it take? What tips and tricks do you have so that I can learn the language faster? Are there any things I can do wrong, or what should I do? So I thought I could make a video about how to successfully learn a foreign language. Some tips and tricks that I'd like to share with you. I prepared some slides that I will share with you throughout the presentation, throughout the video. And this is a slightly longer video. This is about 30 to 40 minutes. So let me share my slides with you, and hopefully you'll find it interesting, some of the input on how to successfully learn a foreign language. So here's what I want to talk about today. I want to give you an overview of proficiency levels. Sometimes people don't even know how to say what language level they already speak or know, or what proficiency level they want to be. So it's important to look at some official proficiency levels here. Also, motivation. What are some different types of motivation? What works, what doesn't? An important part is making time for learning and exposure, and learn how to learn. So I'll give you some tips and tricks on how to learn, things you should be doing. And finally, I want to give you some language specific tips, and I chose German as a foreign language. Why German? Well, you'll learn about that in a minute, because before I talk about proficiency levels, I want to talk to you a little bit about my own multilingual background. So, what languages do I speak? Well, I do consider both German and English my native languages. And having lived and worked in Germany for a really long time, having grown up in an area called Bavaria, I also consider Bavarian an additional language I speak. I know officially that's considered a dialect, not a language. It feels like a language when you live there, or when you have to do with different regions throughout Germany, or also throughout Great Britain and other countries where dialects of specific regions can be quite distinct. And I also want to put the American flag here, because what you hear is not exactly British English. It changed gradually over the years. I've lived in the US for more than 15 years. So obviously my British English has faded into something a little more American, but you will hear it once in a while. So the British English is still there somewhere deep down inside, and it will, of course, never go away. So that's what I would consider a native language, or a native-like language. And that would be proficiency level C2. I'll show you in a minute what that is. But I've also studied other languages. I studied and learned and practiced and used Italian and French. So I would consider my proficiency level at an upper intermediate level, around a B1, B2. So you'll see what that is in a minute. And I've also studied Spanish, but only speak and understand it at a very basic level. I have a personal interest in Brazilian Portuguese and Japanese, but I do not really have any proficiency level at all. It's just a few things that I know, a few words and sentences here and there. So my own linguistic or multilingual background can explain the proficiency levels we have. You may often hear the CEFR, or the Common European Framework. Or I sometimes ask people, what proficiency level are you? Are you more like an A1, B2, or where are you? So an A1 and an A2 are considered basic users. In Spanish, I would consider myself an A1. B1 and B2 are considered independent users. So you know the language well enough to be independent. You don't need a translator. You can go about your daily life and get things done. You can study or work in a foreign country, but people know you're a foreigner, people know you're not a native speaker because you make a lot of mistakes, you don't know certain vocabulary words, you make grammar mistakes, you may need to look up a word in a dictionary or sometimes use a translation app. But on a daily basis, you can do things independently. That's kind of where I see myself in French and Italian. And then we have C1 and C2, the proficient user. If you're C1, you can do almost anything in the foreign language. People still notice you're not a native speaker, but it doesn't matter because it doesn't limit what you're able to do. And a C2 is a true native speaker or somebody who is a near native speaker. People don't immediately notice that you or cannot even imagine that you're not a native speaker. They may not be sure what region or country you're from, but they wouldn't necessarily say that this is a foreign language for you. And this is where I see myself for English and German. In the US, we also use the ILR, the Interagency Language Roundtable. So sometimes you may see proficiency levels expressed in those numbers ranging from 0 to 5. And there was also added a 5+, which is a very specific proficiency level. So these are the proficiency levels you might hear or see, or I use when I work with language students or when I ask them, where do you see yourself? What's your current proficiency level? Now, let's talk about motivation. And when I meet a new student, I always say, why do you want to learn the language? I really feel we need to start with a why. And over the years, I've heard many reasons why. I want to show you 5 reasons, and then I want you to tell me which is the best motivation and who out of those 5 people is most likely to succeed learning and actually using the foreign language successfully over time. Which one do you think is the most successful? What's the best motivation? Here's answer number 1. I need it for my job. Well, could be because if that helps you get a better job, right, a promotion, that's quite a good motivation, isn't it? Or I needed to fulfill a language requirement for school. Well, that gives you added credit. That could get you into an internship, a traineeship, a program. So this could also be a very good motivation, right? Or my fiance is from X, Y, and Z country. That's why I want to learn X, Y, and Z language to actively participate in conversations with the family. It's great motivation, isn't it? You love this person, you want to marry them, and you want to talk to their family. And so that's a good motivation, right? Or number 4, I've always wanted to learn X, Y, and Z language, but have never had enough time. I love languages. This is my 7th language, and I want to give it a try. Oh, yes, believe me, I've worked with people who are really, truly gifted, who speak 6 or 7 languages. Yes, that exists. So if somebody's that gifted in language learning, it should be easy, right? So this person's motivation is the best, or not? Well, I have one more for you. I'm traveling to X, Y, and Z country. I would love to have at least a basic understanding of X, Y, and Z language and be able to say a few things when interacting with locals. After my trip, I would like to continue studying. Sounds also great, right? Has a specific reason, why, seems to know what they want. So they all sound great. They all sound pretty motivated. But which one is the best motivation? Which one out of them is most likely going to be very, very successful, more successful than the others? What do you think? 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? Take a few seconds to think about it. Made up your mind? Made a choice? Drum roll, what's it gonna be? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? If you said 5, well done. Number 5 is the most likely to succeed. Why? Well, this person is intrinsically motivated, wants to learn the language before traveling to the country. I'm pretty sure you can travel to a country without learning the country's language. But this person wants to, has an intrinsic interest, wants to connect with the country and the language. but also understands that a basic understanding is all they can learn at first. So is very realistic about their goals. Wants to be able to say a few things. That's very realistic and realizes that if you want to do more, when you go back for a second or a third trip, you need to continue studying. That's only the beginning. So a lot of good motivating factors come together in number five. So if you chose any other number, you might say, but why not? Why the other four? They sounded so good. Um, a lot of people say the fiance from the other country is their favorite. That's the best motivation. Well, it could be as long as this person realizes that this is not something they can quickly achieve, if they're in it for the long run, if they understand that conversations with the family is something that is the hardest part. As long as they understand these things about language learning, yes, number three could also be successful. But I'm not sure they really understand that because most people who come to me with that situation, they think they take a few months or a few courses just to say a few things. They really believe that if you memorize a few sentences to introduce yourself, you can sustain conversation. That's not the case. To sustain conversation about a multitude of topics is a pretty high proficiency level. We're talking B2, B1 or B2 out of the proficiency levels that I showed you. So number one is definitely extrinsic motivation, and so is number two, meaning if the job or the school didn't require it, you would never learn that language. Why would you? So not a great chance to be successful in the long run. We talked about the fiance. It's still an extrinsic motivation and it's coupled with unrealistic goals. Participating conversations, really. If we change it to really love the sound of the language, want to participate, spend a lot of time in the other country, know that I'm in for the long run, have realistic goals step by step. Okay, number three could become um, a motivated and successful learner, but not at this initial stage. And the last one, isn't that person so gifted? Yeah, and that's the problem. They don't really have time to learn the language intensively, and there's no urgency, there's no need. They don't really need to. It's more like an additional hobby. It's like, oh, I'll take a yoga class, I'll take a painting class. Oh, I'll have a look at the seventh language. They're probably not going to be in it for the long run. So, what are some motivations that really work? Well, some motivators that you should have to succeed are definitely intrinsic interest, a curiosity for the language, a desire to learn it. You feel a connection with the language. There's something that attracts you to it. It shouldn't be just a job or a school requirement or somebody saying, well, you should. You really have to want to. But that alone doesn't help. In addition to that, there should be an actual need. Whenever you have a specific purpose or there's a practical use, like our example where the person is traveling to the country and they need to buy a train ticket, they need to order food, that's a very specific purpose, an actual need, then that is a great motivator. If you coupled it with reward, like you succeed, you can actually really buy that train ticket and you get the food you want. And if you have SMART goals, then that's fantastic. SMART is an acronym. It stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time. So if you make goals for language learning, and it shouldn't be long-term goals only, you should cut it down into doable milestones. Then make sure those milestones or goals are SMART goals. Find something specific, the specific purpose, the practical use. You should know exactly what you want to learn, what you need it for. And that makes it measurable. If your goal is, I want to be able to buy a train ticket, and then you succeed in doing so when you're there, well, then that's very measurable, right? It should be achievable. So don't be unrealistic. If you're just starting out, don't say, I want to become a level B2 in 3 months. I don't think anybody has ever achieved that. So be realistic about what you can do. And then you won't be disappointed. It should be relevant to you. That's very important when you join a group course, a language class, where you're not really in charge of what you're learning. You're just following a curriculum. It's different when you work with a teacher tutor one-on-one. You can really focus on what is relevant to you as an individual. But if you're thinking of taking a class, you will just have to do whatever the curriculum says. And some of the things might not be relevant to you. So you really have to learn to identify the things that are relevant to you and focus on those. And you need to have a time frame within which time do I want to achieve what. That's very important. Not I want to become fluent at some point in the future. That would be a very undefined, unrealistic goal, and definitely not a smart goal. And finally, your realistic expectations about how long it takes to learn a language. You need to make sure you understand you're in for the long run. Language learning is a long-term goal. So if you don't have long-term orientation, then that's not a good motivator. So these are the things, if you fulfill the things on the list, if you can tick things off that list, then your motivation is where it should be to be successful when studying a foreign language. But another point I wanted to talk to you about is that it's also necessary to make time for learning and exposure. Let's say you're totally motivated. How much time do you actually spend on learning the language every week? How many hours do you think? 2, 1 or 2, 5, maybe 20? Does it make it any better if you spend 40 or 60 hours? Well, in general, the more time you can spend, the better, sure. And the more you work your muscle, your language muscle, the better. Compare it to the gym. The weights you use, the more often you go, the more repetition you do, the more weight you can lift over time. It's the same with the language. Um, don't expect much if you spend 1 hour a week. How much can you learn in an hour a week? And even if you can only afford a language teacher for 1 or 2 hours a week, make sure that you do at least do something else on your own every single day. So that's the one thing you should make sure. No matter how many hours you can spend in a language class or with a one-on-one teacher a week, fill the other days with something else. And make sure it's fun. If you're dreading it, you're not going to be successful. Something every day that seems like fun. It should challenge you, not unrealistic, but challenge you. And you should mix up the activities. Don't do the same activity every day. Also mix up reading, listening, speaking, and writing. Don't just read every day or don't just study a grammar book every day. It's not going to be successful. You have to mix up activities. And instead of just reading and studying grammar, you should also make sure you get real life exposure. Make sure you hear the original sound of the language. Luckily, we live in the age of the internet and apps and online videos and things we can use to get this real life exposure. Whatever language you're learning, make sure you can listen to a little video clip every day. Get a clip from a movie, not an entire movie, but a clip from a movie with subtitles. Um, watch it 3 days in a row, study the language in it, and be really happy that on day 3 you actually understand what they're saying. Use this exposure to bring questions back to class or back to your teacher who you see once or twice a week. But be curious enough to self-study and expose yourself to the language as often as possible. And make it part of your life. By doing this, mixing up activities, doing something every day, enjoying it, being curious. You're making it part of your life. If you make it an extracurricular activity that you're dreading, like homework or working overtime, then it's not going to work. You have to integrate it into your daily life. And it starts with our motivating factors. You need to know what you want it for. Put sticky notes around your house, little labels on things. So every day you open the refrigerator, there's a little sticky note on it that says refrigerator in your foreign language. If you want to learn food items, then put sticky notes on food items this week and on clothing items next week, whatever you want to study this week. So really integrate it that much into your life that you can't escape it. You wake up in the morning and something in your house screams in that language to you, and you're forced to think about it and preoccupy your brain with it. And that's what our brain wants. If it's not important to you, the brain will not make an effort to remember. But if your brain realizes that this is really important to you, it will remember over time. So here are a few other things I want to talk to you about. Learn how to learn. If you participate in a group course or if you work with a language teacher or tutor, hopefully they will teach you how to learn. But if you're on your own, at least most of the time, bear those things in mind. And the first thing you should do is find out what type of learner you are. Are you visual? Do you need to see things? Do you react positively to pictures and images? Most of us do. Or are you more auditory? That's the question. Some people really remember things from hearing it, not reading it. So auditory is I remember it better when I hear it, not when I read it. Kinesthetic is when I remember things better when I move my body while I'm studying, repeating, rehearsing. Textual is when I remember it better when I'm reading it or when I'm writing it down. Are you somebody who needs to write it down to remember? Find out what type of learner you are. Some people are interpersonal and intrapersonal learners. Interpersonal means you learn better when you're a member of a group, when there's dialogue, when there's action. Intrapersonal means you learn better when you're on your own. Also, do you enjoy a quiet or an animated space for learning? So, do you need to close the door, be alone in the room, and it needs to be quiet? Or do you benefit from the fact there are things going on? So intrapersonal learning and a quiet space usually goes together, and interpersonal learning and an animated space usually goes together. Which of the two is more attractive to you? Become aware of that and choose the right activities for you. You can also combine these methods. You can combine visual and audio. You can also combine auditory and kinesthetic, whichever you think works for you, combine a couple of them. Or try TPR. TPR is total physical response, meaning your body does exactly what the vocabulary you're studying or what the situation you're studying is about. So if you're learning the word for happy, look happy. If you're learning the word for sad, look sad. If you're learning the word for laughing, then laugh. If you are practicing introducing yourself, meetings and greetings, actually get up from your chair or pretend you're shaking somebody's hand. If you're learning running, then run, or jumping, then jump. This cannot be done with every vocabulary word or situation, but whenever you can, some people actually, a lot of people react very positively to it. If you feel like, oh my gosh, no, I would never want to do that. Okay, great. Then you just found out TPR is not for you. But this is so important to find out what learner type you are. Also, music and dance can be really stimulating to some people. They learn a language really well through music, lyrics of a song you like, or dancing while repeating, rehearsing the numbers or vocabulary words. For some people, this works really well. Or spaced repetition. This is a very important method, and I'll talk more about it on my next slide. Also, personalization, I'll talk about it on the next two slides. And finally, gamification. Gamification may work for some people, not for everyone. But most people like playing. So if you can study vocabulary or become more fluent in a certain dialogue by creating a game around it, then do it. If you hate it, don't do it. I'm just giving you ideas, but you have to find out what works for you. Now, spaced repetition is an important thing to use. Whichever learner type you are, I highly recommend spaced repetition. And recall. Recall is you have to remember what you studied before, and you do it with spaced intervals over time. So you have to find your own rhythm. So for example, you study a new word. You look at it again in 5 minutes from now. Of course, you have to do something else in between. Get distracted, come back, see if you remember. Usually we don't. So you have to do it a couple of times to actually be able to recall the word. Then the space is then 30 minutes, then maybe do it after 3 hours, after day, 3 days a week, and so on. So that's why spaced repetition. The periods of time get longer and longer before you check if you still remember. You can do this in many different ways. You can have vocabulary lists, flashcards. You can use paper flashcards if you are in love with paper. A lot of people still are. Or you can download an app, use an electronic form of spaced repetition. There are many different ways of doing it. Use whichever one you're most comfortable with, but make sure you use a form of spaced repetition. If a new vocabulary word or an entire sentence was on your flashcard or flashes up on your phone, after 2 weeks because your space has become larger and larger. Now you want to check after 2 weeks if you still remember it, and you still do. Well, after a while, you can actually remove it from the spaced repetition because you can rest assured you do now have perfect recall of that vocabulary word. This is how spaced repetition works. As you're putting words or even sentences on your flashcards, you should be careful what you put on there. Not every single word in your textbook, not every single sentence from your language class, especially when you're part of a group. Make sure you choose what you feel is worthwhile memorizing, reviewing, and recalling. You should start with high frequency words. You can search for that term. You can buy high frequency dictionaries in almost every language. That means the most common 500 words or the most common 2,000 words. You should definitely focus on high frequency words because they will enable you to make sentences and start communicating. Then you should add words and structures you often use or like. They may not be high frequency words and structures, but it's something you personally do a lot, structures you use a lot. This is typical for me. I would say this in my native language. Add it to the foreign language. And of course, other words or entire sentences, maybe sayings or idiomatic expressions that express who you are, that reflect your personality because they're fun or they make you smile. So add a few unusual things to your vocabulary list, things that are not at the level you're at the moment. So you're at level A1, you just started, but you're adding a sentence that people would learn in B1 or B2, but just the one sentence, just the one expression because it's so you. This is how we can maintain the pleasure of learning and remain motivated. Because one very big problem of language learning is that we usually sound very intelligent and sophisticated in our native language. But even after half a year or a year of studying a foreign language, we still sound like a 5 or a 10-year-old in the foreign language. And we feel a disconnect between the personality we are, the persona we represent in our native language, and in the foreign language. So adding in entire sentences or those idiomatic expressions, something that allows your personality to shine through, is extremely important to keep you motivated. You should also think of personal connections. How is the word connected to me, to my personal life? Only choose things that are meaningful to you and useful to you. And when you try to memorize 10 words a day or something like that, make good use of mnemonics. Also, group words together, like you're learning all tableware items or cutlery items. Group them together, like breadcrumbs leading to the memorized words. Build stories. I help my students getting used to that. I build stories with them together. We create mnemonics that help them. And over time, they learn how to do it on their own. And finally, remember that rule, especially when you're studying English. So if English is a foreign language to you, you definitely should yield um, that rule, pronunciation, before meaning, before spelling. But it's useful in many languages. This means you should definitely be able to pronounce the word correctly before you know or while you learn what it means. And at the very end, you should make yourself familiar with the spelling of the word, not the other way around. And you should also um, make sure you study your target language's pronunciation rules from day one. They're very different rules on how to pronounce letter combinations, vowel sounds. Make sure you do that as a first thing. Don't assume that when you see a written word, like in a dictionary, that you know how to pronounce it. Luckily, dictionaries today in form of an app or online dictionary have a little symbol similar to this one here. You click on it and you can hear what the word sounds. So try to ignore for the first step. Yeah, you're seeing it in front of you, but try to ignore the spelling of the word and hit that speech button or voice button. Listen to the sound of it many times. Try to repeat. And only if you're sure you fully comprehend how to pronounce it and you can say it properly, you know what the word is, then look at the spelling, say, and this is how it's spelled. I want to give you one example in German. I'm going to say 3 words. You can see what the 3 words are. Obviously, there's a house and there's a tree and there's a car, right? So I'm going to say those 3 words in German. Repeat after me if you want. Haus, Baum, Auto. One more time. Haus, Baum, Auto. Usually I do it 3 times, so one more time. Haus, Baum, Auto. Now you know what it is and what the word sounds like. Now I'm going to show you how these words are spelled. Haus, Baum, Auto. To be honest, if English is your native language, would you have said Haus, Baum, Auto? I don't think so. You might have said something like Haus, Baum, and Auto, right? But it's not. It's Haus, Baum, Auto. So it's very important that you hear it first. You see the object, you know what it is, you absorb the sound of it so that you will never get it wrong. And what can we learn from this? Haus, Baum, Auto. In German, Au sounds like Au in cow. And something like that is also important, those breadcrumbs that lead to recall or memorizing certain things. You see the cow, you remember the ow in cow is how these 3 words sound. So the ow is ow like in cow. This is a good way how to learn. If you use things like that, you will realize that you memorize things faster, you have better recall, and you come across as more authentic when you speak. All right, to come to the end of this chapter of Learn How to Learn before, I want to give you some specific tips on a particular language. Um, just a few things to set yourself up for success and not failure. Please remember the SMART goals we talked about: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant to you, and within a certain time frame. Make sure you have goals like that when it comes to language learning. And hold yourself accountable to achieve those goals. Don't go like, yeah, well, maybe it's not so important. Make sure you hold yourself accountable, or you work with someone else, hold each other accountable. Small group learning is usually a very effective thing. Also, make sure you celebrate those milestones. A lot of people say, oh, there's so much more I have to learn. I will never learn it. Well, instead, focus on what you already know and what you can do. I can do this in the language. I can do that. Realize how much you have actually learned. And you should turn these learning successes into positive reinforcement. Because if you focus on what you have already learned, what you're able to do, that gives you that positive effect, positive reinforcement. Our brains love that. And this will help your brain to keep going, to keep you motivated long term. Because remember, language learning is a lifelong endeavor. If you're in for it, you're in for it long term. If all of these tips sound really interesting and you want to know more about how to make these flashcards or especially spaced repetition, there's a great book I can highly recommend. It's called Fluent Forever by Gabriel Weiner. And he talks about memory and recall. He talks about the 4 skills: listening, reading, speaking, and writing. He talks a lot about how to rewire your brain, how to trick it to remember things. Those tools like spaced repetition, tools and resources. The book is full of tools and resources, maybe too much, maybe more than you can ever do, but pick and choose what works for you. And he also talks about games and the pleasure of learning. Very important that we keep ourselves motivated. So if that's interesting to you, that's a book I can highly recommend. Now, these are my general tips and tricks on how to be successful at learning a foreign language in general, no matter which one. But I promised I also want to give you some language specific tips. So these are our last 3 slides, and this is about German, because German is one of the languages I teach. So the influence of your native language, we often call it L1, plays an important role in terms of what you have to bear in mind when learning that foreign language. I'll give you a couple of examples. German has 3 different types of grammatical gender: der, die, das. So these 3 little words, der, die, das, they all mean the in English. So German has at least 3 types of the. There's more because of another point I'm going to talk about in a minute, which is cases. But those 3 are 3 different types of grammatical gender. Now, if your native language is Italian, you will go like, oh, okay, fine. I can totally deal with that because I'm very familiar with that. We have something like that in our own language. But if your native language is English, you go like, what is that? There's at least 3 types of the, and you're telling me there's even more types of the? It will take you more time to wrap your mind around it. So be aware that what your native language is has a major impact on how easy or how difficult it is for you to learn that language. Another example is that German has 4 cases: nominative, accusative, genitive, dative. That gives us even more forms of the. Now, if your native language is Russian, You would say, oh, yeah, that reminds me of something similar we have in our language. And you already have the mindset. You know how important it is. So you will pay more attention to it. Whereas in English, once again, you're like, what is that? Do I really need that? Come on, I can learn the language without that, right? I don't really need that, do I? I've heard this so many times, but I can't reinforce often enough that this is essential. If you don't deal with these things at the very beginning of learning a language, you will never speak correctly. You will never have this fluent conversation that you're dreaming about. So become aware of some of the features of the foreign language that you may not be familiar with in your native language. Another feature of German is that German verbs are conjugated. Now, if your native language is Spanish, you'll say, sure, very normal. We do the same. If your native language is English, you will have to admit that, yeah, I'm sort of familiar with that idea because the verb to be is conjugated. I am, you are, he, she, it is. Yes, there are different verb forms for each pronoun, but not to the extent it's done in German or in Spanish, because every single verb every time is conjugated, not just to be, but all of them. Or German has this oddity that we have a formal, an informal, and an impersonal you. Now, if your native language is French, you say, sure, of course. Um, we have a perfect translation for all three of them. No problem. Whereas an English speaker would say, really? What is that? So this is you and you and you. So what's the difference between you and you and you? You see how your native language really influences how you approach the foreign language and how easy or difficult it is for you to accept certain concepts of a foreign language. And there are no shortcuts. You can't just say, oh, can't we skip that? No, we can't. And to finish, just a few other peculiarities about the German language. In German, all nouns are capitalized, but the word for I is not. Remember our three words, Haus, Baum, Auto, with their article, all meaning the, das Haus, der Baum, das Auto. So Haus, Baum, Auto are capitalized, they're nouns, whereas the word for I, ich, is not. Or German has many different plural forms. So it's not just adding the S plus a few irregular forms. There are actually many different regular plural forms. Also, German has four letters that English doesn't have, the ones in parentheses. And finally, German pronunciation is very predictable. I think you will love that. It's very reliable. It's not like English, where different letter combinations and vowels can make a very different sound in different words. Not so much in German, but you have to learn the rules. You really have to spend enough time, and that applies to any language really. Spend time to learn how the words are pronounced. So even if I made up an artificial word, you would know how the native speaker would pronounce it based on the pronunciation rules of that language. Because the one thing you should not do is apply your native language's rules to that word from the foreign language. All right, so that brings our presentation to an end. I hope you very much enjoyed the input about how to become a successful foreign language learner and some specific tips about German. If you want to contact me, you know where to find me. Look for my name, Renate Urban, or my company name, Urban Training and Services. Visit my website or connect with me on LinkedIn. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you found this very useful. If you're interested in language lessons or want to work with me as a teacher, you know where to find me. If you just want to watch my videos, please come back, join the community, subscribe to my channel, and enjoy the videos. Thank you very much. Have a great day.